Colombia has seen the highest number of victims of forced displacement this year since the signing of the peace agreement in 2016. Mexico's Supreme Court approved the holding of a recall referendum on the presidency of Andrés Manuel López Obrador as requested by the executive. During his annual end-of-year press conference, Russian President Vladimir Putin noted the ball is in the United States court on Russia's security proposals. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. This year has seen the highest number of victims of forced displacement in Colombia since the signing of the peace agreement in 2016. According to a report by NGO, the Consultancy for Human Rights and Displacement, from January to November 2021, a total of almost 83,000 people were forcibly displaced in Colombia, representing an increase of 169% compared to 2020. There were over 160 events of mass and multiple displacement reported, with the greatest impact on Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities. 5 years after the peace accords were signed in Havana, armed conflict, land disputes, large-scale development projects, violations of human rights and humanitarian law continue, forcing tens of thousands to abandon their homes. The Committee for Dialogue, Reconciliation and Peace of the National Assembly of Venezuela offered an annual report on Wednesday, a year after its installation. Made up of representatives of the main political parties in the country, the Parliamentary Committee was created last year as a space to bring together all social, economic and political sectors in the quest to build stability and peace. According to information provided by the President of the National Assembly, Jorge Rodriguez, the committee plans to include judicial reform as part of the work schedule for the upcoming period, in coordination with the parliamentary committee responsible for adapting the Venezuelan justice system according to proposals from different sectors. The President of the Venezuelan Parliament announced that a meeting will be held to discuss a proposal related to judicial reform as part of the talks between the government and opposition parties.
We welcome the proposal made by the President of the High Body of the Supreme Court, and we are calling for an extraordinary session of the Venezuelan National Assembly on December 3rd in order to initiate the debate on the reform of the constitutional law of the Supreme Court of Justice that will establish the selection and the number of principal and alternate judges.
And Jorge Rodriguez also noted that this process will be conducted in line with the Venezuelan constitution.
Fact that when the law is reformed, an equal number of judges should be established, so that the principal and alternate magistrates that result from the reform are chosen as established in the Constitution.
And in the framework of the meeting of the Parliamentary Committee for Dialogue, Reconciliation and Peace, opposition spokesman Luis Martinez referred to the progress it made in talks regarding the Venezuelan justice system.
We are moving forward in the process of institutionalizing the Venezuelan justice system. We should be and will be the justice system that Venezuela deserves once we have heard from all the sector interests in the matter, in strict compliance with the legal provisions. In the future, soon, with a justice system that goes far beyond even the reform proposed by the President of the Supreme Court of Justice, so that we will have a country with a much better democracy than one we have already enjoyed today.
The opposition spokesman also confirmed the committee's willingness to continue working on the reform of the country's justice system and to make progress in talks with the government.
In short, we are ready, willing to work the hours that are necessary not only in the already convened session on December 3rd, but in subsequent activities to be able to contribute to the justice system of Venezuela corresponding with what each of our fellow citizens deserves.
Almost exactly 1 month before the second anniversary of the lockdown of Wuhan, the Chinese city where the first cases of COVID-19 were detected, China has ordered a new lockdown of a major city, Xi'an, as cases rise again. We have more details in the following report by our correspondent, Ramsey Barasa.
The famous city of the Terracotta Warriors became the new epicenter of China's battle against COVID-19. After more than 200 cases were reported in the last 2 weeks, the country's authorities decreed a total lockdown of this city of 13 million inhabitants. Xi'an, capital of the northern province of Shanxi, joins a list of large cities that have been locked down in China to curb outbreaks of the virus. The guidelines applied in Xi'an are the same as those implemented continuously in many other Chinese cities over the last 2 years. Citizens will have to stay in their homes, and only one person per family will be allowed to go out every day to buy food and other basic necessities. In addition, schools were closed, all events were cancelled, and a limit was imposed on the capacity of public transportation. Long-distance bus stations were closed and more than 85% of flights were suspended. None of Xi'an's 13 million inhabitants can leave the city unless they have a compelling reason, and in order to leave they must receive permission from the authorities and submit a negative COVID-19 test result. Xi'an reported 63 locally transmitted infections on Thursday, December 23rd, and more than 200 since the outbreak broke out. Although the number of cases is very small compared to the total population, and even to those reported daily in other parts of the world, local authorities decided to adopt radical measures such as the lockdown to curb the spread of the virus as soon as possible.
Strict measures were adopted due to the spread and chain of infections of new cases of COVID-19. This has been complex and has involved many sectors of the city, such as transportation, as well as public spaces such as hospitals, commercial complexes, restaurants and schools, where many people were concentrated.
China has managed to keep the pandemic under control in its territory with a zero-tolerance policy towards COVID-19. So far, the country has not confirmed any local infections of the new Omicron variant, and it has confirmed imported cases from travelers arriving from abroad and has therefore raised the alert.
Hasta ahora, el país no ha confirmado ningún contagio local de la nueva variante Omicron, pero sí casos importados de viajeros llegados desde el exterior, ante lo cual ha elevado el nivel de alerta.
The Americas has now registered over 100 million cases of COVID-19 since the start of the pandemic. North America saw a 36% rise in infections last week alone, driven by the United States, according to the Pan American Health Organization. In the United States alone, 73% of the virus sequences corresponding to the Omicron variant, which has already been reported in 18 other countries and territories in the Americas. While parts of Central and South America recorded a decline in infections, a 16% increase was noted in the Caribbean. So far, 57.3% of the population in Latin America and the Caribbean has completed its vaccination schedule, according to official data. And we'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Mexico's Supreme Court approved the holding of a recall referendum on whether President Andrés Manuel López Obrador should continue his term in office, as requested by the executive. The top court ordered the National Electoral Institute to organize a referendum scheduled for April next year, in which the population will vote whether to maintain the current president until 2024. The court ruling rejected the argument presented by the Electoral Authority that there were insufficient economic resources to conduct the vote and that it should be delayed. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador himself called for the referendum on his mandate, noting it would strengthen the country's democracy and ensure he had the population's support to continue his government program. A migrant caravan that's been traveling through Mexico since October began leaving the capital for northern states after reaching agreements with the authorities. The hundreds of mostly Central Americans who remained grouped together on a long journey in a bid to reach the United States left Mexico City in groups aboard buses for the states of Sonora, Nuevo León and Chihuahua, according to activists. Many of those who have made the journey have stopped along the way to take advantage of the possibility of staying in Mexico and receiving employment rather than continuing north. After arriving in the city on December 13th, a delegation from the remaining group negotiated with authorities from the Interior Ministry, which offered to process humanitarian visas. Given the saturation of the migration offices in the capital, it was agreed with the authorities that they would move to 3 northern districts, where they would continue the process.
The joy of knowing that our paths are divided here, and in the end we will hope to get to where we want to go. It is a big step that is being taken, but thank God that they provided us with buses. God there gave us the papers that we need, because the truth is that we walk too far to say that we do not deserve it. Indeed, we deserve it and we have earned it.
They say that the caravan will never arrive. They did not give us a chance, no hope that it would arrive, but thank God that with strength, with the union that we made, despite the blows, the mistreatment, the abuse of migration, we want to do justice.
In Uruguay, trade unions and opposition political parties have denounced persecution under the current government. We have more details in the following report by our correspondent Mateo Grill.
Now, various workers' unions in Uruguay have been denouncing that the executive branch of the government is persecuting social movements, and particularly trade unions, with the aim of criminalizing their activities and generating rejection among the population. The National Federation of Secondary School Teachers in Uruguay is experiencing a very dangerous path of the loss of individual and collective rights and freedoms, where every day the return of institutional violence by the state itself towards trade union organization is noted, which is why we recognize that we have to call for reflection. Government officials and legislators publicly and permanently criticize workers from different platforms if they carry out mobilizations or express opinions contrary to government policy. Union leaders have even been administratively investigated for their opinions, and teachers have been fired from speaking out. In response, unions have filed a complaint with the International Labour Organization. We, as a Federation of Secondary School Teachers, asked the ILO, in framework of a complaint we have filed with the Committee on Freedom of Association, for an exhaustive analysis of the government's actions in terms of trade union freedom. This week, a new chapter was added to this action, which involves accusations on social media, the setting up of investigative committees, removal from posts, and administrative investigation, with approval in the Chamber of Representatives of the law that obliges unions to have legal status, thus forcing them to provide data on their members, the level of territorial action, their economic resources, their methods of relation of authority, and their status. Several legislators know that, behind the discourse of transparency, what the government really intends is to interfere with the union finances by hindering the collecting of union dues. The truth is this is linked to the fact that, for example, Article 7 states that all unions that want to be withholding agents, for example, in terms of their membership dues, cannot do so if there is no legal status in a country where it's free to associate, to join a union or not, where only your individual will implies that the money arrives in whatever way. This anti-union persecution denounced by social movements is also framed within the nervousness generated in the government by the upcoming referendum on the law of urgent consideration, which was approved against the expectations of the ruling party. A defeat for the government in that instance will be a very strong blow to the Luis Lacalle Pou administration.
Mateo Grille, teleSUR, Montevideo.
Climate change is taking its toll on Afghanistan, where the population is already suffering the consequences of 20 years of war and foreign occupation. Once a fertile valley fed by rain and snowmelt from the mountains, the Sangi-Atash area of Afghanistan is now barren due to the effects of climate change over recent decades. The people still living in the region are struggling to survive, with many having fled to neighbouring Iran or living in abject poverty in the country's camps for the displaced, as repeated droughts have parched the land and destroyed pastures. Experts predict that climate change will make droughts even more frequent and severe. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. During his annual end-of-year press conference, Russian President Vladimir Putin noted the ball is in the United States court on Russia's security proposals. Putin said that Washington's reaction and willingness to discuss the security proposals aimed at curbing NATO's eastward expansion were positive, a day after his foreign minister announced that talks on the proposals were expected to start in January. Russia proposed a new security deal with NATO in the face of its military encirclement of the country, as well as the possibility of a Western-backed escalation of the conflict in neighbouring Ukraine. Washington responded that it's willing to discuss the security proposals, but disagrees with part of them and insists that European allies must be part of the talks.
I'd like to emphasize that in general, we have so far seen no positive reactions. US partners told us that they are ready to begin this discussion, this talk at the very start of next year in Geneva.
The Belgian government provisionally committed itself Thursday to phasing out the country's existing nuclear power plants by 2025. Under a complicated compromise agreement reached after all-night negotiations, an assessment will be made on whether Belgium's energy security can be assured if all 7 nuclear plants are shut down. A final decision is expected to be made in March. The plan is to use gas as a bridge towards sustainable energy resources and possible new technology nuclear options later. A political commitment to phase out nuclear energy dates back to 2003, but successive Belgian governments have stalled on the issue. The anti-nuclear Green Party is now part of the governing coalition and has been pressing for action. Hundreds of Palestinians gathered on Thursday for the funeral of a young Palestinian man shot in the back by the Israeli occupation forces. The murder of Mohammed Issa Abbas, aged 26, sparked protests in the West Bank. Abbas died from gunshot wounds to the back after the vehicle he was in was targeted by Israeli forces in the Al-Amara refugee camp in Ramallah city, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Zionist violence against Palestinians has escalated in the occupied West Bank in recent weeks. In one incident, illegal Israeli settlers attacked several Palestinian villages near Nablus city. Palestinian residents say the settlers assaulted villagers, used firearms, set some barracks on fire, and also pelted stones at Palestinian homes. Sudan saw protests on Thursday to denounce sexual attacks after the United Nations said at least 13 women and girls were raped during recent mass protests against the army. Women gathered in the capital Khartoum and its twin city Omdurman to denounce the use of sexual violence as a weapon to silence them. The country has seen ongoing protests since Military Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan led a coup on October 25th that ousted the civilian transitional government. The pro-democracy protests have been met with heavy repression, with at least 47 people killed, according to the Doctors' Committee.
We're raising the issue of rape and suffering of men and women. This is an organized act by the security forces. They've been doing that for many years. These organized acts of sexual assault are one of the tools they use to break the women and prevent them from taking to the streets. Even though they have been doing this for years, we will return to the streets, and our voices will even be louder, and they won't be able to break us. We don't want to just reinstate the rights of rape victims here in Khartoum. We want to get all the rights back, those who have been lost for many years. Ever since the al-Bashir era, we've been facing rape and displacements. We want our full rights back and cannot do so without getting rid of the criminals in the coup council, the murderers, and the Janjaweed militia group.
In the midst of the pandemic and concerns about the future of the global economy, tensions between China and the United States continued in 2021, without Washington taking any notable steps to dismantle its policy of aggression as established under the Trump administration. We have more in the following report by our correspondent Aramsi Parasa.
Ago, the arrival of Joe Biden to the presidency of the United States suggested a change in policy towards China and the possibility of dialogue. 2021 has shown the opposite, with Washington maintaining the confrontation tone initiated by Trump almost completely. China, for its part, has advocated peaceful coexistence and cooperation.
Cooperation can generate mutual benefits for both China and the United States, while confrontation will benefit no one. That is the most important lesson we've learned from the ties between the two countries. We hope that the U.S. side can fulfill its commitment and work with China to spur the path of peaceful coexistence and cooperation.
Throughout the year, the White House maintained its lines of attack on China related to the regions of Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and the South China Sea. But undoubtedly, the reinforcement of its ties with Taiwan and the encouragement of separatist forces on the island was one of the biggest maneuvers against China. Beijing has always said that it will take the necessary measures to defend its sovereignty and that it will not give up the goal of unification under any circumstances.
Taiwan is not a pawn that can be used by others to harm us. The attempts on separatist forces seeking independence and their collusion with U.S. forces are doomed to failure. Taiwan will eventually reunify reunify with China.
In the middle of growing concerns about the pandemic's impact on trade, China insists that the cooperation and pragmatism in its dealing with Washington are key to ensuring a rapid economic recovery after the pandemic ends. The United States, however, has stopped for conflict and reinforced its strategy of sanctions and pressure against Chinese companies in strategic sectors.
The United States unscrupulously uses the pretext of national security to unreasonably repress Chinese institutions and enterprises. Such actions undermine economic principles and affect economic recovery.
While China maintains its growth and consolidates its international position thanks to the solidarity shown with developing countries during the pandemic, the United States has shown in 2021 that regardless of who occupies the Oval Office, it has no plans to allow the second world power to unseat it from the hegemonic position it has held for the last century and will do everything possible to limit its advance.
Irán Esperanza, teleSUR, Beijing, China.
And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.